The beach episode is a super common trope in anime. And owing to the similarities in structure and pacing between episodic TV and long-form video games, it is a trope that is very common in games as well. And for good reason. It serves as a chance to take a breather, to let the characters take a break from the stakes of the larger arc, and it serves to give the viewer or player a chance to watch the characters in a low-stress environment where we can see them being less guarded, more relaxed, and more themselves. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has a beach episode as a major chapter about halfway through the game. It's a brief respite after narrowly escaping Shinra, it's an opportunity to see the party bond and grow, and develop romantic tension, and, of course, hand one to the bisexuals. In the midst of this, there is, of course, a surprise conflict where Hojo shows up and does evil villain stuff, but ultimately it's somewhat inconsequential. But after this comes a moment so profoundly peaceful and yet so melancholic that I couldn't help but just sit there for a minute. Even on another continent, on a beach vacation, the stakes never fade away. Shinra's influence creeps into all corners of the planet, and Sephiroth is still out there somewhere. No rest until the work is done, it seems, and yet they do rest. This encounter isn't a wake-up call that urges the party to immediately resume their quest, but instead it serves to remind the party to savor their time on Costa del Sol. The beach episode is a chance to put characters in situations that bend and flex them in ways that the core narrative doesn't offer. It's a reminder that these heroes aren't just heroes, and they have something that they want to protect and fight for. And what works especially well in this game is that none of this is actually relegated to the beach. It's just another stop on the journey, and there will be many, many more opportunities to relax, enjoy life, and have fun. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth employs absurdism with the specific intention of engaging the player with the world and forming an emotional attachment to it. This attachment mirrors the one that Cloud builds over the course of the game, resulting in a really rewarding cohesion between the narrative and the gameplay, and a game that is, above all, full of joy. Rebirth is a game that delights in delighting the player. There are a billion things to go and do all the time, and the game takes so much joy in its diversions. It takes so much pleasure in reminding you what you're fighting for. At first, all of these side activities might seem like typical open world stuff, and so they are, I suppose, but because everything is genuinely fun, full of love and care, and whimsical and quirky in that classic Final Fantasy way, it sparks an emotional response from the player. This quest has you follow a dog, and there's this whole silly song with a combat variation that appears maybe twice? There is an extended quest where Johnny gets duplicated and you help all of the Johnnies renovate his new hotel, and the variety of the ridiculous Queen's Blood opponents you face is staggering. And most of the side content shares this tone bordering on absurdity, and you might think that this would create tonal whiplash or narrative dissonance with the deeply somber and self-reflective moments. But Final Fantasy VII does not work if you only have the serious moments. Cloud is a dorky goofball, and his whole arc is about breaking down the cold shell that's been built up around him. And Rebirth's focus on joy really helps portray this. Cloud is not only developed in cutscenes, the player is in charge of the way he interacts with the world and how he enjoys what it has to offer. You are directly responsible for investing Cloud in this fight for the planet by treating him to its riches. While you aren't changing the events of the main plot, engaging with the side content contextualizes Cloud's journey in a way that most games of this ilk don't even bother trying. This kind of cohesion between narrative and gameplay is rare, and it might go unnoticed because of its resemblance to random filler activities in other games. But it's at the core of Rebirth's design. Because of Rebirth's specific format as an open world game, the link between Cloud and these goofy activities is front and center here. The original Final Fantasy VII had a lot of fun minigames, but I don't think they accomplished the same narrative effect that Rebirth does, which truly connects the player to the world. And Remake had goofiness for sure, but it also wasn't trying to achieve that same effect. Remake was focused on Midgar and expanding it into a fully fleshed out society, while elevating the gameplay to a contemporary standard. But a lot of its side activities were less than stellar. Rebirth takes the same design philosophy towards expanding the world and characters, but also applies it to the gameplay itself. It is a Herculean feat that this game came out only 4 years after 2020's remake. The size and quality of this game is astounding. The sheer quantity of content is absurd, and usually that's a red flag to me, but I enjoyed almost every second of this game, except for some bogged pacing towards the end. The side quests are meaningful, usually rewarding, and a great way to get to know your party members. The numerous explorable areas are richly designed and delightful to explore, building the planet into a cohesive world that I want to save. I rarely care about the world itself when I'm supposed to save it in a game, but this was something special. Now, all of that stuff is well and good, but that's the side content. What does the main dish look like in a feast of joy? Final Fantasy VII is f***ing ridiculous. Remake was already absurd, the Honeybee Inn in particular is a standout moment, but Rebirth cranks it up to 11. There is no reason for the girls to stumble into this whatever this is, there is no reason for Yuffie to get a costume change, and there is only very little reason for Cloud to box this hunk of man meat with peck physics. And there is no reason for this gay little smirk. All of this is included because it is delightful. It is absolutely joyous. Absolutely nothing in any game ever has pulled the reaction that this scene pulled from me. I was sitting alone in my room, giddy with disbelief and wonder at the nonsense unfolding in front of me. And the juxtaposition with Cloud's cold demeanor is well worn throughout the game. But that doesn't stop it from being funny every single time. Especially since this game covers the part of the story where Cloud really starts to change, these moments are so enriching. This chapter also follows a really down-to-earth and tragic reflection on Barrett's past. But the game doesn't want you to dwell on it. It doesn't drop you into a new region and let you explore with these things weighing heavily on your mind. It takes you to the gold saucer and says, hey, look at this guy's bulge. We probably had to reduce it to keep the T rating. It says, look how much wonder this world holds. Even in this sickly, sweet tourist trap, there is joy and a life to love. There is a future worth looking forward to and fighting for. Rebirth spends a lot of time contrasting the past with the present, and urging you to look toward the future, to not dwell on the past, but to move forward. Where Remake's additions to the story often bordered on fluff and unnecessary padding, I genuinely feel like every addition and every diversion in Rebirth is not just enjoyable, but important. Getting the Keystone in Chapter 12 has been expanded into this outrageous fight with Don Corneo, and rather than feeling like an unneeded hurdle to cross just to add a few more boss fights, it feels like it was included just so you can spend more time laughing. In Kalm, there are these two NPCs arguing and hitting each other, but if you return after a certain point, they'll be holding hands and discussing their next date. The initial arguing is comically intense, and the resolution is heartwarming. And I almost forgot to include this in the script because it is such a minuscule moment in a game that is dozens of hours long. But in Upper Junon, you will find this club exclusively for bald people, and they have this goofy song and dance gesture handshake? It's never referenced again. It's just here this once because it's joyful. Red 13's voice reveals Nanaki, Cloud being turned into a frog, and begrudgingly releasing the angstiest ribbit ever.
Hey! Ribbit. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit.
Red 13 doing this. The game is full, just stuffed to the gills with these kinds of moments. But none of this ever undermines the game's tender and heartfelt scenes. Cloud and Tifa's conversation after the Gongaga reactor incident hits so much harder because of these things. It is a profound game that is also profoundly unserious when it wants to be. And it may just be the most I have ever enjoyed playing a video game. Or rather, it has given me the greatest moments of joy. After 65 hours with most games, I get pretty tired. It's hard to sustain excitement for that long, so even if I'm enjoying a game, it's hard to feel as enthused about it as I did when I started. And while I definitely still got that with Rebirth, some of those last dungeons really don't need to be that long. For the most part, I was joyful every time I picked up the controller. These characters are so heartwarming and so silly, and you never know when something ridiculous is going to happen. None of this whimsicality is haphazard though, it's all very intentional. Good absurdism usually has something to say, and Rebirth employs it to say that this is a world teetering on the brink of destruction. And look how alive it is. Look how many people live and love on this planet, how much fun there is to be had here. It's a subtle distinction, but Rebirth is not a game about stopping the bad guy. It's a game about protecting a delightful world. It is a game about joy.